The second theme is justice, and Stephen Blaney will be the first to respond. Late last year, a judge in Ontario struck down a mandatory one-year jail sentence for a perpetrator found guilty of sexual interference of a 15-year-old girl. Here in Nova Scotia, a young man was acquitted of sexual assault because he believed the sleeping victim had given consent. Do you feel the laws and penalties around sexual assault are adequate? If not, how would you change them? Stephen Blaney.
Your questions are very easy. You know, they're totally inadequate. Why? Because we need to get back to what we've done for 10 years. It's fairly simple. The Vic Dave, the Peter MacKay, the Rob Nicholson did it under Stephen Harper. It's put victims first. That's that simple. I co-sign, thank you. It's very simple. I co-sign the Victim Charter of Right. This is an important piece of legislation, but we still need to stop the revolving doors. We need sometimes to tell the Supreme Court, you're wrong. You know, 1 + 1, we have a count in here, it makes 2. You don't double your time before you get your sentence. We need to have more judges. You know this Jordan case, it's absurd that you are under investigation and you get a free pass because the time is out. Let's just like, no, my time is not out. So look, I want to make one pledge today. No cause shall be unheard and trial aborted because of the ineffectiveness of the current justice system that arms the victims once again. They've been armed once.
Maxime Bernier.
I'm very proud what we did under the Harper government. I think that was the right thing to do for Canadians and for the security of this country. What is the most important, we must have judges at the Supreme Court who will respect the sovereignty of the Parliament. And the judges are not there to make laws, they are there to interpret legislation. And I want to be sure that the next judge at the Supreme Court will be a judge that will interpret the Constitution and not making laws. I think that's very important. Thank you.
Andrew Scheer.
You know, as a father of 5 children, nothing infuriates me more than watching a news item warning me as a parent that the state has allowed a repeat sexual offender back into my community and I should be on guard. I don't think I should have to be on guard as a parent. I think that offender should be under guard in prison. The left likes to talk about justice issues and they like to talk about how they're full of compassion, but their compassion is always for the criminal. I want a justice system that is compassionate for law-abiding men and women and families and the children that they're raising and have a duty to protect.
Rick Peterson.
I'm the son of an RCMP officer, and I have 2 gorgeous daughters. So I think you can understand how I would feel and how I understand anybody else would feel in the case that's been brought up. So I want to draw attention, though, to the bottom end of the justice system, and that's our frontline officers, the men and women who answer the calls, go to the houses, are trying to produce evidence. I commit as Prime Minister to reinforce and to upgrade the arms and the ability that our frontline RCMP officers have. I'm going to tell you that under my leadership, we are going to be recruiting the best and the brightest. Under my leadership, the RCMP will take a new and unblemished role of defending our laws and defending our justice system. Let's help the men and women at the cutting edge of the knife. Let's help the men and women who are out there risking their lives every day for you and I. As their leader, as their Prime Minister, I've got their backs. Thank you.
Pierre Lemieux.
Thank you. I think you're going to find there's a lot of similarity between each of us as candidates in terms of wanting to fight crime and wanting to support victims. But one issue that we really need to highlight and that I've highlighted as a candidate is my concern, and I think your concern, with the Supreme Court and its encroachment on Parliament. And in recent decades, it's been the Supreme Court judges who have decided the most controversial questions, not voters and not Parliament. The most recent being euthanasia. Supreme Court judges have made the law in Canada, and in this case, they did not just simply strike down the euthanasia law. Their ruling was so prescriptive in telling Parliament what they could and could not do that they were indeed making the law. And the Supreme Court is not equipped to do this. So think of Parliament and the legislative process. First reading, second reading, committee, third reading, and then it goes into the Senate. And at each of those stages, you as Canadians have an influence over the formation of that law. At all steps, you have input. None of this happens with the Supreme Court. It simply is overruling Parliament and you, the Canadians.
Deepak Obhrai.
Thank you. We must ensure our law enforcement officers have the funds and the legal framework to keep Canada safe. Punishment must fit the crime. Victim right must be strengthened. Our justice must not be burdened by delays, because justice delayed is justice denied. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say this, and I've said this on many, many occasions. Our country is a different country. Sharia law, as I have stated, has no place in this country. So let's forget that debate. Close it. It's not important. Let's get on to the most important issue. The threat is homegrown terrorism, either be it Islamic radicalization or be white supremacists. Let's get on to make sure our society is a harmonized society. Thank you.
Lisa Raitt.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. I went to school in the 1990s, law school, and it was at that time when we really did toughen up the laws around sexual assault. But if you happen to read an article in the newspaper today, there's something very troubling that's happening with reports of sexual assault, and it's the propensity of law officials to name them as being unfounded in the complaints. Now, I think what we need to do is have a hard look at this. If the girls are coming forward and talking about an assault that happened to them, then we need to make sure that our front line have the best training there is so that they can understand the frailties of the victim that they're dealing with. And that training has to be at the front line. It has to be with the Crown Prosecutor. It has to be with the judges. It should be mandatory. If these girls are coming forward from one of the universities, and I have to tell you, read the article, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia have terrible rankings. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. You have to measure these unfounded calls in our police forces and help them get better training so that girls, when they come forward.
Chris Alexander.
I agree with Lisa. It is a crisis, and the investigation we had today from one Canadian newspaper about these unfounded cases, 1 in 5 victims is being sent home told that they don't know what they're talking about. That is unacceptable. We've all, many of us, heard about these stories, met these victims. We must change the situation. I am the father of 2 daughters, 1 7, 1 5, and the issue is not just within our borders. We are raising children in this country. We are trying to be strong in a world where ISIS is dealing out brutality, especially against women, every day. In a world where Russia has just made domestic violence legal. We need to stand for what is right. And we stand for prevention. We stand with victims. We need a prime minister that cares about these things. We need a justice system that provides access, that is swift, and that keeps repeat offenders off the streets.
Erin O'Toole.
Thank you. The question was on mandatory minimums for sexual assaults, and we've heard a lot of my friends here talk about the Supreme Court and a whole range of other issues. I've consistently, for the last year and a half, said mandatory minimums are required for violent crimes, for kidnapping, and for sexual assaults. That's where our society sends a signal that public safety of our people comes first. Under Conservatives, victims come first, and they did under the Harper government. And I'll use an example. Peter MacKay did incredible work updating our criminal code after the Raitt Parsons case here in Nova Scotia. We tackled cyberbullying because the criminal code did not anticipate that people could be harassed and even harmed online. Conservatives listened and changed the law to protect victims. That's how I will act as Prime Minister. Safe communities, victims first, tough on violent sexual offenders.
Brad Trost.
My friend Erin was right. The question was about mandatory minimum sentences, something that we passed consistently under the previous Conservative government. The problem is judges strike it down. And we've heard a lot of talk here about replacing judges, about doing other things, but there's something in the Canadian Constitution known as the Notwithstanding Clause that progressive Conservative premiers fought for in 1982. And what it really says is the buck stops with Parliament. And if we want those mandatory minimums, we can use what's known as the Notwithstanding Clause. We can pass that legislation again, and we can actually have it implemented in law, even if leftist judges overturn it. If you think a law is moral as Prime Minister of Canada the first time, you should be prepared to stand behind it all the way till you meet your voters. That means a Brad Trost government will back its justice legislation with the notwithstanding clause every time.
Andrew Saxton.
Thank you. The number one responsibility of a government is to ensure the safety of its citizens. Many people in Canada don't think we have a justice system because not everybody gets justice. We have to put the rights of victims ahead of the rights of criminals. When it comes to sexual interference, especially with minors, this is a terrible crime. You're ruining people's lives, and the punishment should fit the crime. It also reminds me of that story of that poor woman in Montreal who had acid thrown in her face melted. The person who did that to her is out walking the streets after a short time. She has to live with those scars for the rest of her life. We need a justice system that is truly a justice system, and as Prime Minister of Canada, I will make sure that we have one.
Michael Chong.
Thanks, Rob. I support mandatory minimum sentences for violent crimes. I support the punishment and deterrent nature of our criminal justice system. My wife and I have 3 young children, William, Alistair, and Cameron. They're in grades 7, 4, and 2, and nothing is more important to us as parents than their safety and security. But where I disagree with the previous Harper government is I think we need to also put an equal emphasis on rehabilitation. I'm a Christian, I believe in redemption, and I also believe that the people who enter our prison system need to also be rehabilitated. The fact of the matter is that on any given day in Canada, there are some 16 or 17,000 federal inmates in our federal penitentiary system. But there are some 3 million Canadians who at one point of their lives made a mistake and committed a criminal offense. We have to understand that the vast majority of people who commit criminal offenses enter our society, and we have to ensure that rehabilitation programs are in place so that once they've discharged their debt to society, they can become, once again, productive members.
Kellie Leitch.
The safety of our communities is paramount in importance for Canadians. It's because of this safe and prosperous nation individuals choose to come here every single day. I care about the safety of Canadians, and I support mandatory minimums. In our country, though, too many women are victims of physical and sexual assaults. I've talked about and proposed changing the legislation around making sure that pepper spray and mace are available for women for self-defense. When I become Prime Minister, I will change the law. I want to make sure that women don't go to jail because they were defending themselves. Now, on my proposal, only one individual has made a comment. Maxime Bernier made fun of this issue. Maxime is wrong. Protecting women from physical and sexual assaults is extremely serious matter. As Prime Minister, I will work to eliminate violence against women and girls and change the law.
Kevin O'Leary.
You know, I travel the world as an investor, and I go to some of the harshest places on earth in doing so. I wish I could take everybody with me here to go to some of these countries where law is just a concept. I have a very hard time criticizing our justice system or the men and women that enforce it in this country when every time I come home, I want to get off the plane and kiss the ground here. This is an extraordinary country. We're the luckiest people on earth. What we enjoy in freedoms, what we have in inclusive societies we've got, and the system that actually supports us, the men and women that enforce it, you have to come with me and see what the other side looks like. It's brutal. We are lucky, lucky, lucky. I can't criticize. I'm sorry. We're lucky.
Thank you. And now we'll move to the rebuttal phase, and first is Lisa Raitt.
There I am. 2 of the people on the panel said to me that the question I answered was wrong, that I should have talked about mandatory minimums. I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to talk about stuff that is topical, and I will make it a promise here right now. After reading what I read in the Globe and Mail about the propensity of unfounded reports going in from police officers, I call upon this Trudeau government today to ensure that in their budget they have money to make sure that these people have the appropriate training so we don't send our daughters to places where they can't get justice.
Brad Trost.
Mike had a really good point about how important rehabilitation is. We don't want people going back and reoffending. But I remember what a Mennonite pastor told me about one of the most effective ways to prevent people from reoffending. Make sure they have their own cells so they aren't forced to join gangs. We need to have adequate number of prison cells for the prisoners, not just to keep them in there, but to keep them from going back. So when they're in there, they don't have to join gangs. It's an important part of our infrastructure.
Maxime Bernier.
I just want to say that it's clear that I'm for mandatory minimum sentence when we need it. And also, we need to have rehabilitation, and we need to put more resources in rehabilitation. So I'm very proud to be Canadian, and as you know, I was Foreign Affairs Minister. I travel across the world, and yes, we have a great system, judiciary system, but that's a great country because of you, because of people like you. All together, we can do something great for this country.
Chris Alexander.
I've lived in some of those countries where there is no rule of law. And yes, I am proud when I see Canada rated the best place in the world, the best country in the world in which to be a woman or girl. But there is no room for complacency on these issues. We have a long way to go. There is still a culture of sexual harassment, well documented, in the RCMP and the Canadian Armed Forces. There is a problem on campus. There is a problem of forced marriage around the world and inside this country. We need to stand up for women and girls.
Andrew Scheer.
I've only ever lived in Canada. I haven't traveled. I don't take $1 million vacations in the Bahamas. I took my wife to Moose Jaw for our honeymoon. But I don't think that we should compare ourselves to countries with no rule of law and say that we can't do better. We're not lucky to live in a country where repeat offenders are let out to terrorize our children.
That concludes question 2.